Okay, so national defense. The state is obligated to defend its citizens against national and international enemies. Romans 13, verse 14. Peace is desirable and ought to be the goal, okay? But our first line of defense is to be peaceful. But then there are times that nations are dealing with other nations that don't want to be peaceful. They have to be prepared to defend their people militarily from enemies, those that would want to attack from within and from without. Okay? So there is a God-given responsibility for nations or state or civil governments to protect their people, to have a defense system, a national defense system. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Okay? And the Bible is saying, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. So the Bible is saying, don't go out there to start fights, with people and other nations. Okay? Live peaceably, but only to the extent that the reciprocity from other nations is also a posture of peace. If they come in war, be ready to defend yourselves. Okay? So each nation, therefore, must prepare itself for the possibility of armed conflict. Okay? So for this reason, the Bible symbol for the authority of the state is the sword in Romans 13, verse 4. And that of the family is the rod. When it says spare the rod and don't spoil the child, okay? And that of the church, the authority that the church has been given spiritually is that of binding and loosing. Matthew 16, verse 19, you can read on that. Proverbs 29, verse 15, spare the rod and spoil the child. So peace cannot just be defined in terms of the absence of war. And I think that's the greatest mistake that has been made, is to assume that if a nation is not at war, then it's at peace. No. There are other enemies within that are equally as debilitating as war. Okay, the outcomes can be equally as debilitating as a nation that is coming out of war is at war. So peace cannot just be defined as the absence of war in a nation. Poverty can equally be as debilitating. Hunger, disease, underdevelopment, and living under despotic regimes, those outcomes can equally be as bad as a country that is in a conflict that's coming out of a war conflict. Timothy chapter 2, verse 1 to 2. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be given or be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Paul writing to Timothy, his protege, is that those who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life. Okay? So peace in any given nation is not a given. There has to be conditions that actually create that peace in that given nation. And one of the conditions for us believers is to pray for kings and those in authority, that they will lead our nations in the direction of peace. They will lead with wisdom, that they will not create strife and create divisions within the nation, amongst the people, so that the conditions of peace are compromised in that given nation, and they can actually lead to conflict in that nation. Okay, so we are commanded as believers to pray for those in authority, to pray for our kings or our leaders, so that we may peaceably live as a nation. Okay, which means that peace is not a given. Those that desire to live in peace, they must also create the conditions for that peace. And the Bible is advocating for us to pray for our kings and to pray for those in authority, that we may peaceably live our lives.